Good morning. You listen to FloorDaily.net, and I'm Kemp Harr. This morning, my guest is Don Finkell, the founder and owner of American OEM. Don, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Kim. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to catch up with you. Just a couple of background things. I want to talk about what's going on with the recent meeting with the Hardwood Federation, which I think met and talked about tariffs. First, a little background. Most people know you. You worked for a big part of your career after studying architecture with Anderson Hardwood, a family business that sold to Shaw. You worked at Shaw for a while, and then you left and took a little retirement. You still had an itch, so you started American OEM. By the namesake, it is a pre-finished engineered hardwood producer that sells probably as much private label as it does branded, right?
Yeah, we actually probably do more private label at this point than we do branded.
Yeah, and it's a Tennessee-based company.
Right, we're located outside of Nashville, Tennessee.
So there was what they called, I believe, a Washington fly-in meeting with the Hardwood Federation. Now, was that a scheduled meeting, or was that just called because of these tariffs?
No, every year the Hardwood Federation does this fly-in, come in, and we have our board meeting, and then a bipartisan discussion. You can't really get anything done, as we see in Washington, without having support from both sides. And in my mind, it's one of the few bipartisan things left in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Do you serve a role on the Hardwood Federation?
I was chairman of the Hardwood Federation a couple of years ago. I represent the National Wood Flooring Association. The Hardwood Federation is a group of about 26 organizations that have some interest in the hardwood industry, a wide-ranging group, all of which have some interest. And it's not common interest necessarily. It depends on the issue.
Yeah, let me go a little deeper on that. I think it's important we point this out. Obviously, we talk about hardwood, everybody thinks about flooring, but there's many more applications for hardwood. And the membership of this organization is the sawmills, the landowners, and like you say, their interests may differ, especially in the case of what's going on right now, because I'm thinking you've got a little bit of a smile on your face with your position today as the owner of American OEM, because these announced tariffs will put an additional 10% tax on Chinese inbound flooring. That's going to be good for your business. But in the American Hardwood Federation, there also are people who want to sell logs and lumber to China, and these tariffs have negatively impacted that business, right?
Yes, this was probably the most contentious fly-in that I've been to, and I've been to probably 6 or 7 of them in a row. It kind of breaks into 3 different groups. You've got the basic raw material, which are landowners, people that own forest, and of course they want to sell and get the highest price for their product. Then you have sawmills, which make lumber, and they're kind of the next step up the value chain, and they're probably the largest group of members as far as the funding of the organization. Then as you go further up the value chain, you've got veneer mills and people that make plywood, and you've got flooring companies. And we also have kitchen and bath manufacturers. And kind of what's happened over the last 25 years, China first impacted furniture, which is kind of at the very top of the value chain. And most of that business, probably 90% of it, has now gone to China. Then it's kind of worked its way down, plywood, engineered flooring, veneer, and so it's working its way down. And so these tariffs help the value-added U.S. industry, right, but they hurt the people that are selling to China. Naturally, people that sell, high-grade lumber and even low-grade lumber. Some of our members, have 60% of their sales are to China in the form of hardwood logs or lumber.
So let me just ask you, if you clarify on this too. We know, based in the flooring business, that starting last Monday we got a 10% tariff, and it might go to 25% first of the year. And then China, this organization called the STCT, they've retaliated. And so now there's tariffs on American-made lumber going into China, right?
President Trump had said, we're going to impose these tariffs if China doesn't, change what they're doing.
Right.
And so the Chinese came back and said, well, if you do that, we will retaliate. And at one point, it started off at 10%, and then President Trump threatened 25%, and actually instructed Bob Lighthouse, or the trade representative, to prepare the 25%.
Yeah.
So there wasn't clarity around whether the retaliatory tariff was going to be 10% or 25%. So the Chinese companies that buy these products, logs and lumber, just said, we're not going to accept your lumber, even if it's here in the port, or on the water coming to China. We're not sure if we want to buy this unless you reduce the price 25%. So what the sawmill saw was an immediate collapse in their orders, even things that had been ordered and shipped. They didn't know if they could get paid for those. And so it really shut the spigot off, which you can imagine anybody that has 60% of their business just cease overnight, they're quite concerned about that. At the fly-in, we had, a discussion. We've tried to find a common ground within the Federation. We came up with three things that we wanted to talk to the congressman about. The first was that the uncertainty of the tariffs was putting a lot of our members in a bad way. And so we asked for them to get some clarity around what the tariffs were going to be and to return to the negotiating table with China. The second thing that we all agreed on was that we felt like China didn't play by the rules and there was not a level playing field. Even when we got trade actions like the hardwood plywood, people got almost a 200% tariff imposed on anti-dumping and countervailing duty. But they saw very little change in the business because they found so many routes around that tariff. The second thing, we believe that China does not play by the rules, and we need help in enforcement because individual companies in America cannot hold China to task on this. It's a much bigger problem. They have too many tools, and we're really included by the antitrust laws in the United States from getting together and doing very much. So we constantly worry that somehow we will have an antitrust action against us. And then the third thing would be a more common thing that the Federation would do was the Farm Bill. Every 5 years there's a Farm Bill, and a lot of forestry issues are included in that because forestry is considered to be an agricultural product. We have a lot of market development that the U.S. government does overseas to try to find markets for U.S. hardwoods. And if China is going to be less of a market, then we need them to be more active in finding other markets. Nobody worried too much about the Farm Bill. Everything was around those first two issues.
All right, let me make a point, and then I've got another question for you. One point I want to make is if there's less demand for the raw logs and lumber, then the price goes down. So the people who make hardwood flooring are grinning maybe for two reasons if they don't own a sawmill or own land. Because,
Some own both.
Okay, yeah, some do. So, but in the case where, in a situation like your raw material prices just dropped because there's less demand for lumber, and there's a tariff on finished products out of China, so you got less competition. So there's 2 points I want to make. Now the question is where does this go?
What we saw was the week after we had the fly-in, the Trump administration announced they were going to put on the tariffs, but they were going to be stepped, 10% now, and 25% January if agreement has not been reached. That did give clarity to the market. So instead of seeing a 25% drop in red oak lumber, it should be closer to 10%. But, any lumber that you ship, it takes a while to get there. It's anybody's guess whether, the 25% will go in. But I believe that it will because what the Trump administration is asking China to do, which is, intellectual property theft. They coerce companies into sharing their IP. When they sell into the Chinese market, they do all kinds of hacking. It's really a war, fought, without guns.
Let me just real quickly, I think 10% probably palatable, and the Chinese continue to supply to this country. 25%, it kind of takes them out, wouldn't you think?
I don't know if it takes them out, but it certainly puts them on an even playing field at that point. I always thought 25% was the level at which things change, and I think it does change.
Okay, and one of the things that will change is I think consumers come into the retail store thinking they were going to buy hardwood or some hardwood-like product, and then they've heard about this new invention and maybe shifted to that. And if that new invention, like I'm talking rigid core LVT, if it's more expensive because that's the only place you can source it, then there might be more engineered hardwood sales.
Well, I would think so. We compete with LVT just like we compete with Chinese-made engineered wood flooring. So if you have, your competitor's price has gone up 25% and yours has stayed the same, or as you say, potentially gone down a little bit, that certainly you would think would be helpful.
Okay, Don, I really appreciate you spending some time with us and telling our listeners about what's going on with the Hardwood Federation, their recent meeting, and the effect of these tariffs. Again, been talking to Don Finkell, the owner and founder of American OEM, and you've been listening to Kemp Harr and FloorDaily.net.